This happened in August, when I was 16. I was getting ready for my driving test. A few months before, I got my learner's permit and started my driving lessons. There was this man, let's call him Mike. He had a car that had an extra brake on the side where the passenger sits. So when I was driving, he would sit beside me. He would guide me on where to go and how to drive properly. We were supposed to have 3 sessions, each lasting 3 hours. After that, I would be set to take my driving test. In our first lesson, we drove around some quiet streets and also on the main road. During the second lesson, we focused on driving in busy areas of the city. The third lesson was a mix of everything, including how to park a car. So, on the day this story happens, it was our third lesson. We started at around 6 in the evening. We drove on various roads and practiced things Mike taught me. As it was getting close to 8, the sun was going down and it began to get dark. Mike took me to a park that had a big parking area. I wasn't familiar with this place. Mike asked me to stop the car. He then placed a few orange cones on the ground. They were set up to show where I should park the car. We then began practicing parking. This parking area was pretty big, and there were a lot of empty spaces. The roads around this area had houses, and it was a peaceful spot. While I was trying to park, another car drove into the parking area. It parked far away from us. I didn't really pay attention to it. But after a while, another car came and parked a bit closer to us, but still at a distance. Mike looked at the cars and said, "I wonder what they're up to. It's strange for people to come and park here, especially when it's dark." I thought maybe he was right, but I just wanted to focus on getting my parking right. I continued practicing and felt happy that I was doing well. I had thought parking would be the toughest part of the driving test for me. One time, while practicing my parking, something strange happened. There were 2 cars in the parking area with us. One of them, all of a sudden, started to move. There were 2 ways to leave the parking area, but instead of using any of them, this car came and parked right behind us. It was so close, just a few steps away. I was confused. Mike, my instructor, looked puzzled too. We weren't blocking the car or anything. They had plenty of room to drive around us and leave. After a short while, Mike said, "I'm going to see what's going on. Stay here." He then got out of our car to talk to the person in the car behind us. I sat in the driver's seat waiting for Mike to come back. But then, something surprising happened. Mike rushed back to our car looking very worried. He told me to start driving out of the parking area right away. I pointed out that we had left the orange cones behind, but he said it didn't matter. I could tell Mike was scared. He told me to just drive and not to look back. As I was driving out, the car that was behind us started to follow. The second car from the parking area joined in and followed us too. Mike whispered to me, "Don't freak out, but the guy in that car had a gun. We need to get to a police station." I was scared but tried to stay calm. Mike guided me, telling me every turn to take to get to the police station quickly. It felt like the longest drive, but it was probably only around 10 minutes. Both cars were still behind us, tailing us closely. But when we reached the police station and I drove in, they didn't follow, they just drove past. Once we were safe inside the police station, Mike and I told the police everything. My driving lesson was obviously over for the day. My parents came to pick me up, and I was just relieved that everything turned out okay. Mike was great during this scary situation. He knew exactly what to do. I did eventually pass my driving test in one go, but that day is one I'll never forget. It was a lesson of a different kind. For the past year, I've been working at a store in a busy mall not far from my house. The mall is just a short 15-minute drive from where I stay. One story from about half a year ago sticks in my mind, and I doubt I'll ever forget it. This happened on a Friday night. I was super tired after finishing my work shift, which went on until around 10 in the evening. It felt like any other regular Friday up to that point. Now, I'm 21 and I'm still in college. So, to save money, I live with my mom and dad. I drive a blue car, let's call it a sky car. and I always park it in the big lot outside the mall. That day, I got to my job at about 2 in the afternoon and was busy till I finished my shift. When I was leaving, the parking lot was almost empty. Hopping into my Sky car, I sent a quick text to my mom, letting her know I was on my way back. The beginning of my drive felt totally fine. However, since I was so tired and my stomach was grumbling, all I could think of was getting home. But then, I heard this weird sound. I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. My Sky car is usually neat and tidy, so I wasn't sure why there would be any odd sound. Maybe something was rolling around in the trunk, though I wasn't sure what it could be. I just decided to keep driving and not overthink the noise. I was driving when I heard another noise a few minutes later. It was different and sounded like it was coming from behind me inside the car. I thought, am I imagining things? The noise bothered me so much that I slowed down to try and figure out where it was coming from. The streets were almost empty since it was so late. I quickly glanced at the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. Concentrating on driving, I then did a double take and looked again. This time, I saw something, or rather someone moving in the back. I was shocked. There was a person hiding in the back of my car. As I kept staring, a man started crawling from the back towards the front seat. My heart raced as I tried to focus on driving and the man at the same time. Suddenly, he lunged forward and tried to grab the steering wheel. He didn't shout or say anything. All I could see was a big winter hat covering most of his head. The road was empty, and on my right was a shallow ditch. As I struggled with the man, I lost control of the car and it veered into the ditch. Thankfully, the ditch wasn't too deep. The car didn't turn over or anything, but the rough ground made us jolt. The next thing I knew, the man had shifted to the front passenger seat. Everything was happening so quickly and was almost like a blur. I was thinking of getting out and running, but before I could even move, the man opened his door and ran out. He disappeared into a nearby forest. Terrified, I locked all the doors and immediately called the cops. While waiting for them, I tried to get my car out of the ditch, but it wouldn't budge. The whole time I was scared he might come back, but luckily he didn't. Soon after, the police arrived and I told them everything. They promised to look for the man and also called a tow truck to help me out. That night, I made it home safe. Thinking back, I guess the man must have snuck into my car while I was working. Maybe I left it unlocked, or perhaps the trunk was slightly open. I'm not sure. Why he picked my car remains a mystery, but I'm just glad I got home safely and never saw him again. "5 years ago, something really spooky happened to me. I was coming back home late, around 11:30 p.m. I still had a long drive, about an hour, before reaching my house. I was on a small road far from the city. There were farms on one side and forests on the other. Very few houses or shops could be seen. I had a very old car, almost 2 decades old. It often gave me trouble. I wanted to buy a new one, but was always too busy. Shopping for a car can be really tiring. That night, my car began to act strange. It was moving slow and felt like it was going to stop any minute. I later learned that there was a problem with a part called the alternator, which made my car's battery lose power. I thought of stopping and calling for help using my phone, but when I checked, there was no phone signal. I wasn't surprised since I was in a really remote area. I looked around. There was a forest to one side and an open field on the other. I tried restarting my phone, hoping it would catch a signal, but no luck. I don't know much about fixing cars. No other cars were passing by. I thought about asking for a ride from a stranger, but knew that could be risky. I decided to wait, thinking maybe the car was just hot and needed to cool down. I know, sounds silly, but I was young, only 20, and didn't know better. Sitting there alone, it was really spooky. The only sounds were distant crickets and frogs. It was also pitch dark since there were no streetlights. After waiting for a while, I saw another car's lights coming from behind. I looked and saw an even older car than mine. It slowed down as it came near and then stopped just ahead of me. I was unsure whether to be scared or happy, but my gut told me something wasn't right. A man who seemed about middle-aged got out of that car and started walking towards mine. When the man came close, I opened my car door to step out. He looked at my car and asked, "Hey, what's wrong with your car?" I replied, "I don't know, it just stopped." He nodded and said, "There's a gas station not too far from here, about a few miles ahead. Need a lift?" Now, accepting a ride from someone I didn't know made me uneasy. I told him, "No, I'm good, but can I borrow your phone to call for help?" He looked at his phone and shook his head. "These parts don't get good reception. My phone isn't catching any signal. No calls will go through." I thought for a moment, trying to weigh my options. I asked, "How far exactly is this gas station?" He scratched his chin. "About 4, maybe 5 miles. Walking that distance would take a long time, maybe 2 hours round trip." The more I thought about it, the more it seemed reasonable to just go with him. He probably was just a local trying to help. But still, something about him made me uncomfortable. After a moment's hesitation, I said, "All right, I'll take the ride, thanks." He gestured to his old car. "Hop in." Inside, I immediately noticed the car's age. It looked like something from the late 80s. There was a strong smell of old cigarettes, and the back seat had empty beer cans everywhere. This made me feel even more uneasy. I put on my seatbelt and tried to strike a friendly conversation. "Thanks for helping me out." He just replied, "No problem," and started the car. We drove in silence. Neither of us seemed to know what to talk about. All around us were trees and open fields. I kept hoping to see some signs of life or the promised gas station. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes, I mustered up some courage and asked, "Is the gas station close by?" He just said, "Yeah, it's coming up." To distract myself, I asked, "Do you know which brand of gas station it is?" He seemed uncertain. "I'm not sure." The minutes felt longer than they were. My anxiety grew with each passing second. We should have reached the gas station by now. I finally saw one up ahead, but he didn't slow down. I pointed and said, "Hey, isn't that the gas station?" But he didn't answer and drove right past it. Fear crept up my spine. I said, "I think you missed it." He didn't respond. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing. I thought, I have to get out. This isn't safe. I'd rather be stranded on the road than be in that car. So there I was, stuck in a car with a man I didn't really know or trust. Feeling a bit uneasy, I took out my phone to see if I had any signal. No luck, still 0 bars. But the man noticed and, in a serious voice, told me, "Put that away." I quickly did as he said. We were speeding down the road around 50 miles an hour, and I began to seriously think of making a run for it, maybe jumping out into the grassy ditch on the side of the road. But it looked risky, and the car door seemed tricky to open because it was so old. Time seemed to drag on, and I felt like we'd been driving forever. The man hadn't said anything for quite a while, making me even more anxious. Then I spotted something, a sharp bend in the road up ahead. I knew he'd have to slow down for that, and that could be my chance. As we approached the turn, the car started slowing down. We were down to about 20 miles an hour. I thought, now or never. I quickly pulled up the lock, flung the door open, and made my leap. The landing was rough. My legs hit the road and I rolled into the ditch. It hurt, but not as bad as I'd feared. I scrambled to my feet. Hearing the screech of tires, I looked back. He had stopped. I bolted into the nearby woods without a second thought. The trees weren't thick, but it was pretty dark, so I hoped he wouldn't see me. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding loudly in my ears. After what felt like hours, I slowed to a walk, catching my breath. Up ahead, I saw a dim light. It was from a house, a beacon of hope in this scary situation. I ran to the front door and knocked hard. A person opened up, and I quickly asked them to call the police. They didn't let me in, but I was just relieved to be near someone. I waited in their driveway, feeling safer now. After about 10 minutes, the police arrived. They listened as I recounted everything. Later on, they gave me a ride back to my broken car. Long story short, I got home that night, really late. I was just grateful to be safe. Not long after, I decided to get a new car. And as for the mysterious man, I never found out what happened to him or what his intentions were. I just hoped he never tried to trick anyone else again. I felt lucky to have escaped and hoped no one else would find themselves in such a situation. I work late shifts and usually finish my job after midnight. This means I often drive home when it's super dark. It's nice, though, because the roads are empty, and I can drive peacefully. My job is in a big city, but my home is in a more rural area about 20 minutes away. This means I have to pass through some roads surrounded by forests on my way home. One night, after a usual late shift, I hopped into my average-size SUV and started my journey home. Everything was calm. The only light on the road came from my car's headlights. As I was getting closer to my home, about 5 minutes away, I was on a road that had a forest on either side. This road only had 2 lanes, one for cars going in my direction and one for cars coming from the opposite direction. There was hardly any space on the side of the road before the woods began. Driving on that stretch, I noticed something suddenly come onto the road a bit ahead. I first thought it might be a deer because seeing them is pretty common around that area. But as I got closer, it was clear it wasn't a deer, but a person. And not just any person, but a man dressed entirely in black. Now, this was weird. Why would someone be running out from the forest and then just stand in the middle of the road late at night? As I got closer, I saw he was wearing a black ski mask too, which made everything even stranger and a bit scary. I decided to move to the left lane to pass him since there were no other cars around, but as I did, the man also moved to the left, blocking my way. So I tried moving back to the right lane. Guess what? The man moved to the right too, blocking me again. Late at night, when I was just about 10 feet away from this mysterious man in black, it was clear he wasn't letting me drive past him. He wasn't signaling for help or anything, no waving or shouting. He was just standing there, blocking my path. I stopped my car. When I did, the man began slowly walking toward me. I had a bad feeling. Everything inside me said, "Run!" So I quickly shifted my car into reverse, trying to put distance between us. But as I backed up, he started to walk faster, then began to run. Backing up quickly isn't my best skill. I decided I had to turn my car around to get away faster. I swerved right, almost going off the road. I stopped for a brief second and shifted into drive, turning left. But in that quick moment when I was stationary, the man reached my car. He tried to yank open the passenger door, but thankfully it was locked. He hit the door a couple of times, trying to get in. That's when I floored the gas pedal and drove off as fast as I could. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw him try to chase after me for a bit. But soon, he stood still in the middle of the road as I drove further away. It was terrifying. I decided not to take that route home that night. Instead, I picked a different way to be safe. I also called the police to let them know about this strange man. By the time they got there, he was probably long gone, but I felt it was right to report it. I reached home in about 10 minutes, feeling relieved. From that day on, I went back to my regular route, but every time I passed that area, I would feel a bit uneasy. What if he was there again? But luckily, nothing like that ever happened again. To this day, I wonder about that man's intentions. I'm just happy I managed to escape. A few weeks ago, I had an interesting experience while driving home from my buddy's place. It was late, around 1 in the morning. My buddy, Tom, lives in an apartment just about a short 5-minute drive from where I live. We're super close and visit each other often. I've driven this route back and forth so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed. On this particular night, the streets were silent, and I didn't see any other cars around. My journey usually involves driving through a quiet lane near Tom's place, and then merging onto a slightly busier street that leads straight to my home. At the end of this main street, I typically make a left turn to reach my apartment's parking lot. As I was driving on the main road, I noticed how especially quiet it was that night. I continued driving until I reached a traffic signal. Just as I got close, the light turned red. There was already a car waiting there, and while I was stopping, something caught my eye. To my left, standing on the small concrete strip that divides the two directions of traffic, was a guy. Considering the time, I found it odd for someone to just be standing there. More strangely, he wasn't trying to cross the road or move in any particular direction. He just stood still. I was in the left lane, getting ready to make my usual turn home, so the guy was really close to my car, maybe about 10 feet or so. Waiting for the traffic light to turn green felt like an eternity. And then, out of nowhere, I noticed him slowly walking towards my car from the corner of my eye. Nervously, I watched as he got closer and closer until he was right beside my driver's window. Then he leaned over and knocked softly on the glass. I wasn't sure what to do, but cautiously rolled down the window just a tiny bit. The man's face was in shadow, but he spoke up. "Hey, could you give me a ride?" Given the situation and the time, this request felt super creepy. Without hesitation, I replied, "Sorry, can't help," and hoped the light would turn green soon. A short while back, something pretty wild happened to me when I was driving home. It was already dark out, and I had been at my friend, Jake's apartment. It's just a short 5-minute drive from my place. Jake and I hang out a lot, and I know the way home like the back of my hand. That night, as I was returning, I came across a guy at a traffic light. He approached me asking for a ride, and when I told him I couldn't, things took a sudden, scary turn. Before I knew it, he had opened my back door and hopped in. To make matters worse, he tried grabbing my arm from behind, pulling me towards him. Everything happened so quickly I barely had time to process it. I wish I could tell you I bravely fought him off, but truth be told, I was scared out of my mind. All I could think of was getting away. In a quick move, I managed to open my driver's door, leap out of the car, and take off running as fast as I could. My heart was racing as I dashed back to Jake's apartment. With the stranger now alone in my car, I didn't risk turning around to see if he was following me or driving away in my car. When I finally reached Jake's door, I was gasping for breath, and after letting him know what happened, we called the cops. They were prompt and took my statement. I reported my car stolen, and Jake was kind enough to drive me home. Luckily, I didn't have any urgent commitments the next day. But to my relief, the very next evening, I received a call that my car had been found. It was abandoned in a nearby Walmart parking area, just a short drive from where it all happened. The car itself was all right, just a bit ruffled up on the inside. It was a huge relief. What scares me the most looking back is not knowing the man's true intentions. Was he after my car, my money, or something even worse? Whatever it was clear he wasn't just looking for a simple ride. Even though I'll never know if they caught him, I'm just thankful I got away when I did. Always remember, stay aware and stay safe.